Shalom. I'm Rabbi Scott from Beth Yeshua Messianic Synagogue. Welcome to our home, and these are our midweek Torah studies, which we provide for you folks, recorded from our home. And we go through the Torah portion and just draw out some thoughts and some things to meditate on. These are very fun and delightful for me. I hope they are a blessing to you. A couple announcements as we get started. Beth Yeshua Messianic Synagogue in Fort Myers, Florida. We are open for services with some special accommodations considering social distancing and this kind of thing. So we would welcome you if you're in Fort Myers, either visiting or if you live here, to join us, Fort Myers, Florida. You can find all that information on the internet. The next sort of matter of business that I have for you is that of subscriptions. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, in which case you get a notification every time there is a Torah study or a Shabbat service that is posted. We have our Shabbat services 11 a.m. on Saturdays, and then of course these midweek teachings are uploaded sometime during the middle of the week. Okay, without further delay, let's begin. This week's Torah portion is Chukkat, which means regulation, from Bamidbar, from Numbers chapter 19 through chapter 22. This week is also a double portion. It's not a leap year. So the double portion is Balak, Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 22 through chapter 25, 9. So the first Chukkat, 19:1 through chapter 22:1, and then Balak, chapter 22:2 through chapter 25, verse 9. We are doing some things here, learning how to use the technology and make it available for you. And so what you see on your screen right now, hopefully, if I can do this right, you should see Sefaria, and then you can also see other things as we make them available to you. For example, here we have the text in English, a Tree of Life version here, and then of course on this screen we have the Torah portion from Sefaria. Here it is here, Balak, Chukkat, and this is chapter 19 of Numbers, Bamidbar. So you can see that here. So we're working our way through these sort of abilities that we have to help you. Let's begin with a summary of both portions. Chukkat, God approached Moses and Aaron, said, "Speak to the sons of Israel, the children of Israel, and find a completely red cow." We call this the Red Heifer, the red cow on which there is no blemish and which has never been yoked. You give it to the high priest, Eleazar, and he will take it outside the camp and slaughter it. This cow is then made into an offering, and those that participate in this sacrifice will be unclean until the evening. "This is an everlasting statute," says Adonai. "One who touches the corpse of any human being becomes unclean for 7 days. If the corpse is in a tent, all who are in the tent are also unclean." And there's a purification process involving water for people and for their possessions. So this is the first chapter of the portion. And next we have this. The entire community of Israel came into the wilderness of Sin and settled in Kadesh. And Miriam died there in Kadesh and was buried there. And the next line that we have is, in Kadesh there was no water for the community, and the people assembled against Moses and Aaron. They grumbled, they complained, "Why did you bring us out here to die?" And Moses and Aaron approach Adonai, and they fall on their faces. And Adonai says to Moses, "Take the rod and assemble the community, and you and your brother Aaron are to speak to the rock in front of the people. You will bring forth water from the rock for the people and for their animals." So Moses and Aaron take the rod, and they go to the rock, and Moses says to them, "Listen now, you rebels, shall we bring forth water for you from this rock?" And Moses raises the rod and strikes the rock with the staff, with the rod, and strikes the rock twice. water comes forth, the people drink. But because of this one act, we have this, where Adonai says to Moses and to Aaron, because you did not believe in me to set me apart as holy before the children of Israel, for this one act you shall not lead the people into the land of Canaan, the land that is promised to them. Next we have Moses sending messengers to the king of Edom. Moses is asking the king if the Israelites can pass through the land of Edom peacefully. They're not going to eat or drink from their land. The king of Edom denies them passage. Moses requests again they go by a different road and this time pay for the water that they would drink. Again, the king of Edom says no. And so they are twice denied anything that they can do as far as traveling through the land of Edom. They journeyed forth until they came to Mount Hor. And Adonai says to Moses and Aaron, because Aaron defied my word at the waters of contention in Kadesh, that Aaron shall not enter the land. And Aaron and his son Eleazar are brought up on the mountain with Moses, and there Aaron's garments, the garments of the high priest, will be taken off of him, and then his son will be dressed in the garments of the high priest, and then Aaron passes there and dies there. When Moses and Eleazar come down from Mount Hor, the entire community, the people of Israel, saw that Aaron was not there and that Aaron had died, and so they wept and they mourned for Aaron for 30 days. After this, the Canaanite king heard that the Israelites were coming. How could you not? There were 6 million, maybe as many as 1.5 to 6 million people traveling through the desert, and here they come. And so he makes war on them. But Adonai delivered up the Canaanites and delivered the people of Israel. Along the way, they were traveling, and the people began to complain again of insufficient food and water. And so Adonai sends poisonous snakes against the people. And many of them were poisoned by these snakes and perished. And people came to Moses and they said, "We have sinned. We have spoken against God and against you. Pray that Adonai will deliver us from the snakes." And so Moses does pray for the people. Adonai says to Moses, "Raise up a snake on a pole, a copper snake, and people who look on the copper snake will live." The Israelites continue to journey on, and Adonai gives them water from a well this time. The Israelites sent out message to the king of the Amorites to pass peacefully through the land. The king decided to attack Israel instead, and with Adonai's blessings, Israel defeated the people of Amorite. And then the next next part of the narrative is the Israelites travel from there to the land of the Amorites, and they asked again to travel peacefully through the land. There was another war and another victory that was sanctioned by Adonai. The Israelites took possessions of the land before journeying on and camping in the wastelands of Moab on the other side of Jericho. And so concludes the summary, which was given up for Chukkat. Continuing on with the second portion, Balak. Miriam and Aaron die, and Moses and the Israelites must go up against the Edomites, the Canaanites, the Amorites, and the Amorites to continue towards entering the land. Each time Adonai helped them. They didn't actually fight against the Edomites. I'd have to look at that specifically. But it appears that they did fight. We know that they did fight against the Canaanites, the Amorites, and the Amorites. Let's go look at that real quick, because that's a point of question in my mind, what we have going on there in the beginning of Balak. Let's see what we have happening here. Going back to Numbers chapter 21. And okay. Well, sorry for the confusion, if there is any. There was some measure of cooperation, or at least some tolerance towards the people of Edom, because the people of Edom were descendants of the people of Abraham, and so they were given room there in that respect. People of Edom being considered the descendants from people of Abraham, descendants people of Esau. And so because of that, they weren't supposed to fight against their brothers, according to Adonai, and because of that, they indeed were given some respect by the people of Israel. I'm not sure why I indicated here that they had fought against the Edomites, so sorry about that clarification. In any case, they did fight and wage war against the Canaanites, the Amorites, and the Amorites, and they were victorious each time. Balak, the king of Moab, the Moabites, had seen how the people of Israel had won these wars. And so Balak recruits and hires a prophet, a fellow named Balaam, and he says, "Come to us and curse these people. We know that whomever you bless is blessed, and whomever you curse is cursed." And Adonai says to Balaam, "Don't go with them. You will not curse the Hebrew people. They are blessed." So Balaam tells the messengers at first no, and then when Balak heard Balaam's answer, he sent even more important messengers and gave him, promised him a house full of silver and gold. And while initially Balaam says no, he says, but stick around and we'll see what else Adonai says. So this time Adonai tells Balaam, "You may go, but only to do what I say." So in the morning, Balaam saddled his donkey, went with Balak's officers, and then we have this amazing exchange between the angel of God standing with a sword in his hand, as a reminder of the host of heaven opposing, or an indication of the host of heaven opposing Balaam and the thing that he was about to do. And this exchange between Balaam's female donkey and the angel and Balaam. 3 times the angel leads the donkey away from the path, and 3 times Balaam hits his donkey in rage and anger. Then Adonai allows the donkey to speak in its own defense, and the donkey is concerned about that, and wants to know why the donkey is being assaulted by Balaam. And Balaam seems to not miss a beat when the donkey speaks to him, and so we have this exchange. So Balaam goes and looks out over the people of Israel, and he blesses them and doesn't curse them. And the king, Balak, says, "Do not curse them and do not bless them. If you're going to speak, if you're going to bless them, don't say anything." And Balaam's response is, "Well, I only do what God tells me to. I only say what God will tell me to say." And so they take to another place called the Field of Seers, and to show him the Ivrit, the Hebrews, and Balaam tells Balak to build offerings there, and so Balak does that. And then God tells Balaam to say this prophecy to Balak over the people, this blessing over the people of Israel. And so again they go to another peak, and they look out over the wasteland, and they make sacrifices. And Balaam could see that in the eyes of God it was right to only bless Israel. They weren't going to curse them. And so the Spirit of God comes upon Balaam this time. And he says this, "Oh, how good are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, Israel," and so on and so forth. Balak is furious, and he says, "I've asked you to curse them, curse my enemies, and 3 times you bless them." And Balaam says, "I must do as God asks me to do. Now I shall give you one piece of advice. What the Hebrews will do to your people will be only in the end of days." At that, Balaam and Balak went their separate ways. And the Hebrews settle in Shittim, and the people began to sin with the daughters of Moab and to bow down to Moabite gods. Adonai was angry at the Israelites and said to Moses, "Take all the leaders of the people away and hang them in the presence of in the daylight, and my anger may go away from Israel." And it was done. And Pinchas, the priest, killed the final Israelite man and the Midianite woman. 24,000 lost their lives to this. Okay, that's the summary of the Parsha, the Parshiot this week. All right, I want to draw out a couple things here as we talk our way through this. In Chukkat, we see the narrative of the red heifer, and the idea that we take the red heifer outside the camp and we sacrifice it there. In the Hebrew, we have this. In the Hebrew, it says this. Let me bring this across, and you can take a look here with me. And it says it right here. Para ha'adamah. And we see that. It's going to show up on your screen here. Para ha'adamah. The cow, the red cow or the red heifer. This red heifer, this adamah, the red, what does that remind us of in the text? It reminds us of the going back to Adam. Adam was the Adam or the Adamah, red earth, out of the redness. What else do we have in the Adamic narratives that is red? What else do we see that is red? It is the Chol Dameh Achika, the voice of the blood. It says in Genesis Bereshit chapter 4. Let's go ahead and look at that here on your screen, and we should be able to find that fairly quickly. And we see this here. The Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel? I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" Abel responds, and then Adonai says, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." And this is the blood that cries out to him. Once again, the redness of the blood. The Kol Dameh Ahika is what we call that, the voice of the blood. What color is the color of the blood that's poured out on the ground? It's the same color as the cow. This narrative of Cain, what do we see happening with Cain? We see that Cain is going to be cursed. He's going to become a wanderer on the earth, that the soil will no longer yield its strength to you. Adam, the one who came out of the earth, the Adamah, the red, this will now become a curse to Cain. It's as if the red earth is going to remind Cain of the blood of his brother that was spilt on the ground, that poured out on the ground. And Cain is going to be a wanderer. He's going to be restless. He's going to be in exile. He's going to build cities, but he's going to be alone in all of that. We also have mentioned at the same time these when they take the red cow and they sacrifice the cow and they burn the cow to the ashes. Also, they include with these ashes the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the scarlet yarn, and these are all burned together and they become ashes together here in the sacrifice of the red cow. Two other times in the text we have mentions of some kind of combination of these same elements. In Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 14, we have cleansing from leprosy, a spiritual condition that renders a person as dead as one who is like stillborn. A house determined to have tzara'at, leprosy, likewise is treated in the same way. We use the feathers of the bird to paint the blood on the person or on the house. The leprosy referred to requires a great attention to detail. As soon as you have an outbreak or a spot of leprosy on your skin, or you have a mark on your house that seems to be leprous, immediately a great deal of attention and a great deal of concern goes into that. It becomes the focus of your concerns, in that you have a number of tasks that you have to do. There's a program in place to become cleansed. There are inspections. You have to inspect whether or not the leprosy is surface or if it has gotten into the fibers of the wood of the house or the materials of the house. You have a great deal of attention that is cast upon the leprosy. Leprosy, the tzara'at in the scriptures, is a physiological spiritual condition, is how I would describe that. In other words, it's not Hansen's disease, what we call leprosy today, that is being referred to in the text. It's this spiritual, physiological hybrid condition. And the point of it is that you have to become intimately acquainted with your condition. You have to become intimately aware of how you're doing, of what this is, the ramifications of it, how far it's spread, how bad it is. You have to take some time to look at it. It becomes your focus. The physiological aspect of that we might understand. Any disease needs to be carefully addressed and carefully cured. But spiritually, consider the spiritual equivalent to the physiological model. In other words, what would the spiritual equivalent be to this physiological condition of leprosy? If I have to go through a bunch of exercises and steps in order to make myself pure, in order to rid myself completely, in order to prove to myself that the physiological condition has been cured, what must I do for the spiritual condition? Is there an aspect of the spiritual condition that requires the same attention, same great attention to detail? On Yom Kippur, we have this. We have a great deal of attention given to our sin. The Chukkat, the Chatat, the sin confessions that we have are pretty exhausting because they're so thorough. For the sin of wanton looks, for the sin of the eyes, for the sin of the flesh, for the sin of my heart. We go through these confessions, and if you take them seriously, midway through the afternoon on Yom Kippur, you're just exhausted at your own self-analysis and self-introspection. This is the exercise of true confession. This is the exercise of true dealing with the physiological and spiritual condition of sin. Leprosy is like that. It is a spiritual and physiological condition that imitates the sin in our lives. Okay. We just talked about Cain. And what do we see with Cain? Here's the difficulty with the human being. Human beings are largely self-aware in all the wrong ways, and largely self-indifferent in all the wrong ways. In other words, I shouldn't take myself too seriously. I should be somewhat indifferent to myself in order to be a faithful and humble person. What is love? Love does not consider one's own agenda. One does not consider one's own self higher than others. That's the expression of love. So there is a sense of self-indifference that is right and good and true. But here's the human condition, is that we're largely self-indifferent in all the wrong ways. And we're largely self-aware in all the wrong ways. What should I be aware of about myself? What should I be aware of? I should be aware of my sin. I should be aware of my flesh. I should be aware of my weaknesses, my tendencies to gravitate towards the evil tongue, the evil speech, etc. What should I not be aware of myself? I should not be aware of how I look in my selfies. I should not be aware of how I look on Instagram. We have a self-aware culture. However, we are self-aware just in all the wrong ways. Nobody's posting on Instagram their chatats, their confessions of their sin. But boy, we're willing to post on Instagram pictures of ourselves with puppies, right? So, or whatever the other, pictures are that we like. Pictures of ourselves at the beach, pictures of us enjoying our favorite food. You see, it's a self-awareness that is invested in the wrong area. All right. What is a sociopath? A sociopath or sociopathic tendencies, one aspect of a sociopath is a person who feels no shame or wrongdoing or guilt. But another aspect, another way to understand a sociopath is a person who is inordinately concerned about self or self-aware and inordinately unconcerned about others or about their own sin. So once again, we see this. Largely self-aware in all the wrong ways and largely self-indifferent in all the wrong ways. We see this in the narratives of Cain. After Cain has killed Abel and Adonai warned Cain about his sin, he was unconcerned with his sin when warned by Adonai about his sin. His only concern was with the offering that was spurned. Cain is the original sociopath, concerned only with his own reputation, unconcerned with his own hatred and rage and jealousy, concerned only with his own gain in his offering, the gain of the favor of Adonai, unconcerned with his own violence, even though he was warned by Adonai about his violence. Adonai says to Cain, where is Abel your brother? What does Cain say? He says, I don't know. I don't know where my brother is. And on the one hand, we could argue that that's just a very practical phrase. The experience of death in our culture, we, through violence and violent depictions in our culture, whether it be in media or entertainment, can become jaded to death. But Cain had no experience of death before this. Cain had never seen somebody die before. There ought to have been some sort of psychological moment when Cain is concerned about the loss of his brother, but he says, I don't know. It's indifference. It's sin, basically. In indifference to his sin. Subsequently, Adonai banishes Cain to be a wanderer on the earth, in exile, outside of the places of his family. He's alone. Ironically, he goes and he builds cities to surround himself with people in defiance, perhaps, of the judgment of Adonai. So Cain leaves the presence of Adonai. In contrast to this, we see the sacrifice of the red cow being performed outside the camp in a ceremony that reminds us of the purification ceremony after Tzada'at and of the Pesach, of the Passover. The exile there in the narrative of the red cow, the sacrifice of the red cow, the exile there in the narratives, I think it's Exodus, I don't remember, Leviticus 14, I think, is where we talk about the Tzada'at. The exile there is to teach us to not be indifferent to our own sin. Cain's exile was judgment against his indifference, but the exile that is accorded to us and mandated by Adonai to us when we come down with Tzada'at is to teach us about how to not be indifferent to our own sin, and not be indifferent in the balance of life and death. Like the stillborn child or the nearly stillborn child, it's life in the balance. We don't just keep running our race. We don't just get back to the grindstone and pretend that nothing just happened. If Adonai comes to the woman who has just lost a child in stillbirth, and he says to you, where is your child? She is grief-stricken, she is distraught. That's right, that's appropriate. We should have that same reaction to all of our physiological and spiritual conditions that are in and around our sin and our flesh. It is life in the balance. We don't want to become sociopathic with our humanity. We want to pause and take stock. We want to connect with the moment, and so forth. So, next in our parsha, we see that Miriam has died, and the people are quarreling with Moses. They complain that they have no water, and Adonai tells Moses and Aaron, "Take the staff." This would be the staff of Aaron that budded, the staff that was from the presence of Adonai. Take this and speak to the rock. And so Moses is going to he's done this once before. Previously they didn't have any water. Moses went and he struck the rock, and the rock gave up its water, and the people had water to drink. This time Adonai is very specific. Take the staff from the presence of Adonai, and take this and go and speak to the rock. And instead, Moses says, Shimu na hamarim. Listen now, you rebels, in verse 10. Let's go ahead and pull that up if we can here. Go across and see what we've got. Oh, I need to go back to Numbers 20. Okay. Community was out water. Moses took the rod from before him, from before the Lord. Safaria translation here, he took the rod right here. Moving down, and he says it here. Shimu, and then here, Hamorim. Here is the Hamorim, and here is the Shimu Hamorim here. Not sure why it keeps doing this over here. I haven't figured out how to turn that off yet. I may have that here. Let's see if I go to this here, and let's scroll down to Numbers 20. Moses, listen, you rebels, and it is Hamorim, Adonai. I may not be able to find it here. Let me see. This text is very small for me, I'm sorry to say. Yeah, I may be wasting your time here as we try to pour through this. Okay, let's go back here. All right, the text here says Shimu Hamorim. The part that I want to draw to your attention is rebels here, the word for rebels. And as you see that, listen now, you rebels, this word for rebels here, this morim, you should be able to see it on your screen, and that is here. Listen, you rebels. Shimu. Hamorim. And what you see on your screen, it's a little bit small, might be hard for you to read. But the part that I want you to take note of here is this mem, resh, yod, mem, the morim. The root word there is mara. It's the same spelling that we had back in chapter 5. In chapter 5, we had this, the narrative of the bitter waters. The bitter waters that bring a curse. Remember, this is the narrative in chapter 5 where you have the ceremony of the woman who is accused of unfaithfulness, and she is to drink the bitter waters. And in verse 18 we have this mehamaraim, hamararim, the bitter waters that bring a curse. Again, we keep this, we repeat this phrase, the mem, resh, yod, mem, as the root. Again, later in the passage, verse 22, of numbers, we have the hamayim, hamararim, which is that, again, the bitter waters. So, again, the repetition of this is the Mem, Resh, Yod, Mem. The last piece of the puzzle is Miriam in verse 1. This is in Kadesh, and Miriam has passed here in Kadesh. It says Miriam died there. Let's go look at that if we can on your screen, and I will try to bring that up for you. Let's go back up to verse 1. Again, we're in chapter 20, Bamidbar, Numbers, and it says here that Miriam died there. And what do we see on the name of Miriam is the same letters as bitterness and as used by Moses here in this passage when he calls them out, you rebels. So let's look at that again. Listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you from this rock? And we have this here, this word right here. And of course in Sepharia it has these helps over here on the right hand side, and we see this, Mem, Resh, Mara, Het, Mem, Resh, Het, the root of course, again repeating this in the text here, we have Mem, Resh, Yod, Mem. So somehow there's some sort of linguistic connection that's happening here between the words of the identification of Miriam as the one who has died, and these rebels who are causing problems, and of this bitterness. We see a connection to Miriam. Okay, so let's look at Miriam. What do we know about Miriam? We know that in many of the references to the text that Miriam is connected with water. Somehow she's associated with water. The beginning of the story that we know of Miriam is that she's watching over her brother as her brother is in a basket waiting for his death on the waters. Rather than the people of Egypt casting Moses into the water to his death, the mother cast Moses into the water effectively for his death, let's be honest, because what was really going to happen? This is a thing that needs to be mentioned. When Moses' mother made the basket and then put him in the reeds on the water, what did she really expect to have happen? What did she really think was going to happen? Did she really think that Moses was going to be delivered and saved? Or was Moses likely to be found and likely to be put to death, along with all the other Hebrew boys? That's absolutely what she must have expected would likely happen. And so she puts him in this basket, and Miriam is watching over Moses. And of course we know the rest of the story. The strong right hand, the right hand of Adonai, in the form of the daughter of Pharaoh, comes out and reaches out and delivers Moses from the waters. Okay, that's the first place that we see any record of. So. Later on, we see Miriam at the Sea of Reeds, Yam Suf, and while there, of course, after Adonai splits the sea, Miriam leads the people in this song of praise to Adonai, and leads the women especially in this song of praise and worship. And we've talked about this as being a healing moment for the women of Israel who had previously watched their children be thrown to their death, now stood on the bank and watched the Pharaoh and the Egyptians sink beneath the waves and pass and perish and disappear from all humanity, much like their own children had been forced to perish, being thrown into the Nile. So Miriam later is referenced in this, somehow connected to waters. The sages teach that Miriam was somehow being used by Adonai to supernaturally provide water, that she was a well of water for Bnei Israel. And we see that here, why the sages teach that, because immediately after Miriam passes, we have this statement that there's no water. It's immediate. As soon as Miriam passes, there's no water. Number one. Number two, there's no mourning for Miriam. We saw in this passage that they mourned 30 days for Aaron, and we will see later that they mourn for Moses. This trio, this triple threat of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam were significant leaders of Israel during these 40 years. How is it that Miriam passes and there's no mourning? It's as if she didn't exist for them. A couple interpretations are, it could be that Miriam was a hero of the earlier generation, because what we're talking about here, at this point, they're preparing to enter the land. Some 38 years have passed. Nearly every one of the previous generation has died. And so Miriam is a hero of the previous generation. She may not have been as well known by the current generation. That's one possible reading of this. But another reading of this would be that when Miriam passed, they were without water, because somehow Adonai had used Miriam to supernaturally provide water for the people of Israel. She was a well for them of some kind. And so when she passed the well, the waters dried up and disappeared, and all of a sudden they're without water and they panic, because other than oxygen, water is the most necessary ingredient to life. We'll get by without shelter for a while. We'll get by 3 weeks. You can last 3 weeks without food, typically. Only 3 days without water, 3 minutes without air. That's the rule that they taught us in the Boy Scouts. 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. So if you're in the woods and lost, then the way that you survive is you find water. So the people had lost their well, so to speak, in Miriam, and they panicked, and they began to declare that they began to complain that they didn't have water. So Moses says this, and he comes to the rock, and he strikes the rock, and he says this: are we supposed to bring forth water from this rock? Are we supposed to force water from this rock? From this single event, Moses and Aaron were not allowed to enter Canaan. They were not allowed to enter the Promised Land. And we ask the question, why was Moses not allowed to enter the Promised Land? What huge mistake came from this one singular event? And I want to walk through this with you. There's a lot of different speculation and interpretation and teaching on this. I want to share with you my thoughts. And this is always a product of study and thought and meditation. So this is what I'm thinking right now, and we could talk next year and maybe I'll be thinking something different. But this is kind of where I'm at with it right now. From this single event, Moses and Aaron are not allowed to enter Canaan. Why is that? Let's go to Psalm, to Elim, chapter 19. The heavens declare the glory of God. The sky shows his handiwork. Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and those dwelling upon it. Psalm 50. For every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know the birds of the mountains. Everything moving in the field is mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for all the world is mine, says Adonai. So in consideration of all these things, that the earth is the Lord's, that Adonai fills it, everything belongs to him. And look what we have, Luke chapter 19, verse 37. When Yeshua came near the slope of the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began to rejoice. They praised Adonai with a loud voice for all the miracles they had seen, saying, Blessed is the King who comes in the name of Adonai, shalom in heaven and glory in the highest. And we see this exultant kind of praise where they just have this outburst. And the way this is often described is that it's Yeshua coming in to the city, and they can't help it. They just praise the Lord. They just kind of burst forth. And some of the Pharisees from the crowd say to him, Teacher, rebuke your disciples. Answering them, Yeshua says, I tell you that if these keep silent, the stones will shout out. What does that mean, that the stones will cry out? Is it poetic? Is it metaphorical? Let me offer you an explanation, a possibility. It's not poetic or metaphorical. It is that the stones would actually be compelled to bring forth praise to Adonai. My son has a collection of stones on his windowsill. Just simple little stones that he's collected at various places. They're just rocks. I could hold them up to my ear and I don't hear anything. They're just silent. But this stone, my son's stone, could be compelled to bring forth water in the same way the stone could be compelled to bring forth praise. The common interpretation is that the stone is compelled to bring forth praise because the glory of Adonai overwhelms the stone so it can't help itself, and it bursts forth with praise. And on the one hand, we think that's appropriate because the glory and the majesty and the power of Adonai is appropriate, such that, yes, the rocks and the stones and the trees and the hills would burst forth praise. It just can't help itself. It cries out. Let me give you a different teaching on this. And it begins with this hint in our current text. That Adonai told Moses and Aaron, take the one staff, and it is the one staff from the presence of Adonai. Take the one staff out of the presence from Adonai, the rod, and go and speak to the rock. V'debartem el hasela, put words to the rock. V'natan mema, put words to the rock. Go and speak to the rock. Now here's what I'm saying. When you speak to a person, you give them the option to respond. Will Adonai compel praise in the earth? Well, of course, he compels praise in the earth. But what of us? If he compels praise from the earth, from the rocks and the trees and the hills, but what of us? What of us human beings? Does he compel praise from us? Do you wake up in the morning and after washing your face, sit down and all of a sudden out of your soul bursts forth praise and worship and glory of Adonai? Well, perhaps, but realistically, look, from most of us, the answer would be no. We don't exultantly, uncontrollably, automatically burst forth praise. What does it say? It says, my sheep know my voice. He speaks to us, and we give him the praise of our lips. At this point, the people, Bnei Israel, these are the children of the children. These are the children of the people who came out of Egypt. This is after 38 years of wandering. They did not make the same mistakes of their parents' generation. Or will they? Here, Miriam dies and we have no water. How will they respond? How will they react? Moses is told to go speak to the rocks and give the rocks a chance to give up its water. And that's what it says there in different interpretations. It will yield its water. It will give up its water. In a sense, Adonai is telling Moses, speak to the rock the way we're going to speak to the people of Israel. We speak to the people of Israel and they will give up their praise. We speak to the rock and it will choose to give up its water. And in this way, Adonai is caused to be holy among them. Here's the point of what I'm trying to narrow in on for you. And it is this, that when Moses was told to go speak to the rock, it was an example of Adonai speaking to the children of Israel, an example to us that Adonai has spoken to us in order to not compel praise, but to give us a chance to choose to praise. The rock will yield up, it will give up its water. It's a self-willed response rather than a breaking response. Remember the cleft of the rock that produced water, as opposed to here we have the rock yielding up or giving up its water. Yes, Adonai can break me and compel me to worship him. It says in the text, in the Bible, that every knee will bow down, every tongue will confess. You see, here's the point of it, is Adonai will compel praise from his enemies. But from his children, he speaks to them. My sheep know my voice. Adonai will compel confession from his enemies. They will bow the knee. But from us, his children, he speaks to us, and we bow the knee. Do you see the difference? Do you see what's happening here? All right. Notice in the following passages, the people navigated around Edom. They're attacked by the Canaanite. They are attacked by Arad, and they say to Adonai, not through Moses, but they say to Adonai in Numbers chapter 21, Bamidbar chapter 21, Israel vowed to Adonai and said, if you deliver this people into our hand. In other words, the people now are going to Adonai directly. The singularity, the unity of the people of Israel, and it's this. It is a singularity. I can pull it up for you on the text here, if we can do that. Let me find a way to do that for you. Let's see if I have that, and I will go. Here it is, right here. Okay. Let's go on down 21. On your screen, you see chapter 21. Who dwelt in the Negev learned that Israel was coming by way of Atharim. He engaged Israel in a battle and took some of them captive. Then Israel made a vow to the Lord and said, if you deliver this people into our hand, we will proscribe their towns. The Lord heeded Israel's plea and delivered up the Canaanites. Israel makes a vow directly to the Lord, Adonai. They approach Adonai directly, and Adonai heeded Israel's plea. Notice the singularity here. They are now representing themselves. They are now acting on their own behalf, representing themselves before Adonai. Later they become impatient, and Adonai sends snakes, and the snakes are biting them. And the people came to Moses, and they said, we have sinned against Adonai and against you. They volunteered their sin. They confessed their sin. It's like when your child comes to you to confess something they've done wrong, and they say, I'm sorry. We see in these pages the people of Israel are traveling. They're making progress. They're doing good. And then we see this, that Adonai gives them water without complaint. Verse 16, this is the well where Adonai said to Moses, gather the people, I will give them water. Then Israel, once again the unity people, Israel sings this song, verse 17, spring up, O well. And we have a children's song, spring up, O well. From there we have these victories over the Amorites, over Og of Bashan. After all these victories, we come to the story of Balaam, the prophet, who spoke blessings over Israel instead of curses. I don't have time to get into all of it today. If you want to do some additional study on your own, one of the things that I want you to take note of as you read through the narrative of Balaam is that Adonai compelled praise out of the mouth of Balaam. He spoke to the children of Israel. They had a chance to speak their praise back, to obey Adonai. He spoke to them, but he compelled blessing out of the mouth of Balaam. In the same way that praise can be compelled out of the mouths of trees and rocks, even out of the mouths of this female donkey of Balaam. But in contrast to that, Adonai speaks and woos those he loves. Like I said a few minutes ago, Adonai compels truth and blessing out of the mouths of his enemies, but his sheep know his voice. Remember, it said, speak to the rock and it will yield up its water. There is so much more in the narrative of Balaam. One of the things to take note of is that Israel is on a roll. They're becoming obedient. They're having many victories. They're on the edge of entering the land. And then we have this in the narrative of Balaam, where they are tempted by the daughters of these people and tempted off into idolatry. And what it is that Balaam was ineffective at cursing them, and so instead of cursing them, they tempted them. That's the crux of our dilemma in these days, is the enemy is trying to curse the people of God and is ineffective, and therefore since it's ineffective, then he's reduced to tempting us. And that's exactly what's happening, is the kingdom of God is being tempted in these days, in these times. All right. In final comment and thought on this, just that if you want to discuss this anymore, if you want to have any questions or comments, please let me know in the comments section. If you want to dialogue on this, we won't have time for this. The next parsha is Pinchas, so we won't have time to get into Balak. But if you'd like to get into Balak sidebar with me, by all means, let's read through it and talk about it. And I'd be open to do that with some of you if you like. So once again, for another week, thank you for joining me in this way. And may Adonai bless you and keep you as you go.